Yeah. So, I was gonna wait till the show started, but I'm very superstitious too. Like I have to do the same thing over. Like before every speech, I do the same thing over and over again.
What is the same thing that you do?
Like I listen to a playlist, the same songs in order every time. Like I have to eat the same thing. It's been like that since like my childhood. I'm gonna wait till the podcast starts, but
the podcast has started, my friend.
Oh, it did?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
So I just do that. I just hit the button and we go.
Okay, perfect.
So walk me through your pre-speech routine. That is a phenomenal starter.
Well, I'm very superstitious. It's been like that since I was a kid, since I played basketball. Like when I was winning tournament MVPs and I got necklaces and rewards for it. But whenever I have a bad game, I'll like starve myself for like at least 2 hours. It's a weird thing, but it helps me. Mm-hmm. But like when I'm giving my speeches for like my TEDx talk or my speech in Carbondale or the speech where I gave in front of Chicago with a crowd of like 5,000 people, I listen to the same songs over and over again. It is Panic at the Disco, and it goes this order. It's Bob Marley, No Woman, No Cry,
okay.
Panic at the Disco, High Hopes, Panic at the Disco again, New Perspective, Panic at the Disco, Bohemian Rhapsody, not the Queen's version, the Brendan Urie version, and then A Man in the Wilderness is a rock and roll song. And then last but not least, this song from My Hero Academia, I Want to Be a Hero. Like those same songs over and over again before every single speech. I have to hear it. I zone out, and I'm just like listening to it. I feel the salty winds come in like with a new perspective, and I'm like, okay, I'm in here. And I know they'll never win. Like I know they'll never win because I can't give up. I can't surrender. And also I always listen to a Dr. King speech. Every single time I listen to Bob Dylan's before some speeches too. Every single time I have to get into the mood. I have to feel the spirit. I always hear these civil rights songs. I ain't gonna let nobody turn me around. It helps. It helps me zone out to know that this is bigger than me. Like, I'm like, when I think about the people before me, like, when I think about Father Brown saw segregation, my granny saw segregation, my next door neighbor, Mr. Banks, saw segregation, Mrs. Matthews, my academic advisor, all saw signs saying no color. And to have that opportunity to hear the music that they listen to feel that bravery, to go out there, to say I'm a person is remarkable. And that's why I have to listen to it every single time. I'm very superstitious. I have to go in that order.
And remarkable is a great way to describe this podcast, episode 28 of the WTF Carbondale podcast, where we talk to Travis Washington, an interesting person who has been to Carbondale, who has left Carbondale, who is back through Carbondale for the moment being. So really an exciting thing for me in terms of like the format of the show. Like he's the first person to have come back, and like right now he's just in a holding pattern in Carbondale for a short period of time. So like we're in between what he has done and what he's going to do and what he's done here as well. So that is just, it's cool. I'm excited to have that. WTF Carbondale, episode 28 of the podcast, where we talk to interesting people about their interesting lives, and we tie it all back together to this little place we call home, Carbondale, Illinois. And the best part is I don't have to educate you too much on the format either, because
I saw like
I gotta stand
episodes.
in Travis Washington.
It took 3 episodes. I was like, whoa, what time is it? It was one of those things, because it's so interesting to hear people's perspective on Carbondale. Like, I'll just go right into how I ended up here. So I was really good at basketball. I had looks with that. I ended up quitting that because there was some bumping heads with the coach. It was very mentally abusive at one point where I just started doing track. And I even played football for a year. I hated football. Every single second of football, I hated it. Like, it's cool to watch, but it's not that I wasn't good. It's just I hated it.
Yeah.
I hated it. And then when I was like, okay, I can't learn these plays, that's when I gave it all in track. And I went from jumping the season starting out at 36 feet to 44 feet in one season. I was winning medals, and I'm like, I'm going to go do track in college. And then my parents were like, "You're not going to the Olympics. You're not going to the NBA." And I was like, "Well, ouch." You're going to SIUC. I was mad at first, but now that I got my master's degree, it was good. I ended up coming here. I was a CD student. Didn't score high on the ACT. And SIU is one heck of an opportunity. They gave me all the supplies I needed, the tutors I needed, and I know that if I went to any other university, I wouldn't be successful. I met my best friends here. I discovered who I was because I had a colonized mind. I had this idea of inferiority to somebody white, and Africana studies and being here has helped me evolve. Yeah, and the crazy thing is, my best friends, my man Daryl's out there, Xavier's out there, but my best friends end up becoming Nick, Nate, Toby, and Nick's wife now, Hannah, they're all white, and they have even guided me. And I'm like, it's crazy who you learn from. Mm-hmm. And the crazy, you want to hear another story is that all of them met their significant other at SIU. I was the last one. I met my fiance at SIU, and I was like, well, okay. Even my friend Daryl, who left SIU, he's like, oh, the world is mine. I can get any girl now. Ends up dating somebody from SIU. It's amazing how SIU has influence over you. It really is. I end up leaving, going to, I'm a full-time math teacher out there in Kansas, and then the school was closed down because of COVID. Now I'm back here, and I saw your podcast. I'm like, let me get on here. Like, I was 3 episodes in. Yeah.
And it just planted out. No, an interesting thing about Carbondale in terms of like you're talking about having to challenge the colonized mind.
Yeah.
Right. And something about Carbondale, right? So it's this progressive place in the middle of, conservative rural America. But like, let's be real, there's really solid entrenched racism in Carbondale, right? In like a very special way. It's like it is some whiteness and some racism that for somebody who is young and driven and like wants to change a mindset can like come in here and challenge, and not just like use it to challenge themselves, but also challenge the system at large that exists around them that they may not have grown up with, but like they're in the midst of now, and now they get to push back on it.
And I ask people which one is, I asked somebody who had their PhD, what's worse, internalized racism or institutionalized racism? And he says internalized. And as I've gotten older, it is more internalized, because if you accept that you are inferior, then anybody can walk all over you. It's whether or not you believe that you are worthy. And the craziest thing is, let me tell you how bad racism has affected me. Like in 7th grade, I remember I went to a predominantly popular black school where there was a lot of successful black lawyers, teachers, even the principal was black. But when it was Black History Month, I was angry. And I was like seeing all these posters, and now that I'm here, and no longer accepting of that inferiority, I'm kind of ashamed of it, but I'm not, because it put me on this journey to accept who I am. And I get it, and I've so far exceeded what I was, and I'm like, no, that's just the system and how it brought you up to make you feel like you're not worthy. And we do grow up in a white male perspective society. We do. My favorite superhero is white. My favorite actor is white. What I tell you about Star Wars was created by somebody white, but had influence over me and guided me to where I need to go. But even though that has brought me here and brought me forth, I have to learn that you have to find that just because you learn from something white doesn't mean you lose your identity. Just because it inspires you, you cannot lose your identity. And one thing, my favorite slave narrative was by Ellen and William Craft, where it was about a white woman who was enslaved in Louisiana, and she said the following facts are sufficient to prove: he who has the power shall trample the sacred rights of the weak, no matter the color of their skin. And I come to find out that white people were enslaved in Louisiana, kidnapped, bought. Native Americans, black people even bought slaves and purchased people. So I began to realize the system as a whole, yes, institutionalized and racism is there, but oppression is wrong no matter who has the power. And that's just that's where I've seen I've grown. I went from just being Democrats enough to not just being Democrats enough, accepting the whole institution as a whole. And it's not just white people oppressing black people, it's oppression universally. because the world is bigger than there's 193 countries. There's somebody brown or black oppressing somebody white, and somebody white oppressing somebody white as well, or brown and black people oppressing somebody else brown and black. It's a whole system that needs to be changed and warped.
So what was the first thing that you did where you felt like you really stood up and like against the idea of oppression that you have identified now and helped to like mold a better understanding from your own perspective?
What helped was I was a slow reader. I've grown, but it was after my first semester of Africana Studies, and I was an RA this summer, and I remember my TV breaking, and I was so pissed. And I remember throwing something against the wall, and it cut a light on, and it was like this glowing light over the slave narrative book, like, like in the movie. And I was like, darn it, I guess I got to read this summer. And then I started reading. I started with Nat Turner. I started with Ellen William Craft. Then I started with Equiano. And then the slave narrative, because I was very ignorant at first, that I hated the most was the Frederick Douglass slave narrative, was because he used so many big vocabulary words. I remember I had to highlight, go to a dictionary. I was like, look, Frederick, I'm a slow reader. You're adding to it. Like, I did not like him because I was like, dude, every other page I had to highlight to expand my vocabulary. But it was a slow progression. And then the situation where I ended up giving a speech wearing the Black Lives Matter shirt was when Leilani was threatened. And I was like, whoa, like, okay. And then I worked in the Capitol and starting to see the importance of voting and how the system works. Like, voting, that matters. When somebody's like, my vote don't count, I'm like, if it didn't, they wouldn't be suppressing it. And to have this firm belief in yourself, like the Hands Up Act, like this is where all those readings, all those times I was reading, putting in work, staying inside to read, because I wanted to be the smartest person in the room. I wanted to be the best leader I can be. Yeah. Like, I had that special feeling since I was like in first grade. You're going to do something big. You're going to do something big. I'm like, what is it? But I had to educate myself in order to reach that level. And the Hands Up Act, it looks like, oh, wow, it's moving pretty fast. But I'm like, no, it's a one step at a time progression that I've come to learn. Patience, like I told you, Yoda said, experience is the best teacher. And like learning to wait and be still and realizing it's bigger than me. Yeah.
Now I got to chew on this and figure out where the heck I was trying to go. Mm-hmm. Were you at the Illinois State Capitol, or were you in D.C.?
Oh, Illinois State Capitol.
Okay, so Illinois State Capitol.
Yeah.
Is that where you latched on to the idea of like legislation and policy is the thing to move the needle, or did the idea come before the time in Springfield?
The idea? That's a good question. See, I was a system thinking like, oh, yeah, let me be in the system. But all change has come outside the system that I've become to learn. When I was in the Capitol, I was doing things most people weren't doing. As an intern, the $15 minimum wage bill I was working on, my pharmaceutical report was read by a state rep. I was doing these things in the Capitol. And I'm like, what? I have all this knowledge. And I'm like, hey, guys, I'm like, when I talked to other people in the Capitol, they didn't know these things. And I was coming into a situation where I'm like, I knew more than most. And I'm like, okay, like, all these hours that I put in the gym, like, you know what I'm saying? Actually reading, like in class, there's a reason why I got some CDs in college, because in class, I was actually reading Huffington Post articles and Think Progress articles instead of paying attention in class. I'm like, why do I know more than some people? But it's like, that was just my determination. But when I left the Capitol, I've learned that you have to draw attention from the outside to move legislation. Nothing wrong with these state reps. There's a lot of good people. I hate when people say, oh, all politicians are dirty. No, it's just they have 100 problems.
Yeah.
Your problem might mean more to you than my problem. Like the greatest example, my dad's like universal health care, right? That's his issue. My mom's issue is like just say jobs. My issue, I love to is foreign policy. Yeah. Everybody's issue is more important than the other, and I can't say that issue is more important than the next person. Like Medicaid, to me, that's important. Like to me, that crosses all racial barrier lines. Like a lot of people like, oh, how did that governor win in Ohio and West Virginia? I'm like, well, they expanded Medicaid.
Yeah.
Like, I can't argue with somebody that, like, if you're a Republican, you believe in Medicaid, you have no beef with me. Like, that's how I feel. That's one thing I also learned is that it's just not the right. It's not just the left. It's the top manipulating a lot of people. Like, a lot of people don't want us to get along. But one thing I've learned with the system is that it takes outside influence. It takes a lot of outside influence.
Well, and I've learned that. I've watched other people learn that over the past several years. Like, just seeing Carbondale is like this little laboratory of, like, social experimentation because of all the different types of people and all the different interests that exist in a very small, arguably, group of people between the institutions that are larger, like a healthcare system, a city government, or a state-ran university, right? Mixed in with the interest of all the people that just live everyday lives, mixed in with the business interests of people who want to, either use the place to make money and take it elsewhere, or use the place to make money and keep it here.
Yes.
Right. And all of these different interests pulling in lots of different directions with different perspectives from gender, race,
yes.
religion,
yes.
Economic, socioeconomic backgrounds. Like, all of those different components are very representative of America. Right. Mm-hmm. And I explain all of that in conversation to get around to the main idea of it takes outside influence to move the actual policymakers that are on the inside of the system.
Absolutely.
Right. And so what you see in Carbondale is everybody's got their own interest group, whether it's 3 people or 300 people
yes.
in a group. Right. Everybody is out there making their pull, and they'll go to a board of trustees meeting, they'll go to a city council meeting, they'll go to a Jackson County board meeting. They will go and engage with people that make policy at a state and federal level that influences what's going on here, and they'll fight for it from external influence. And you'll see the outcome of that one way or the other. And I don't know. It's just it's neat because in a larger city like a Chicago, it's going to get lost, right? Because everybody's going to work on their own thing, and there's going to be so many people
yes.
available there to work with you on your one thing. You're going to stay so narrowly focused on that. But in Carbondale, you're only going to have so many people to work on your one thing, and you're going to have to cross paths with
yes.
so many other people that want to work on their
yes.
own thing, but also have an interest in your thing too.
Yes, absolutely. And one thing that I've learned over these years is is that a lot of people are taught not to think. They're really not. Mm-hmm. They're taught not to think outside the box. And it's disappointing because sometimes it's a very lonely road. Mm-hmm. Like, when I talk about foreign policy, why is my number one issue? Because I used to think, it's not important I'm obsessed with it. I was invited out to go to the Netherlands before COVID happened to study diplomacy. I ended up doing a certificate online. But, like, what's outside of you actually influences the inside. Mm-hmm. Like, when I tell people, this Iraq war we spent $5 trillion on, we got $1.5 trillion in student loan debt, we got a D+ on infrastructure. That's where all the money went.
Yeah.
Or when I explain, the best part of having a stage, and thank you for this podium, and this is why I love the Hands Up Act, because it gives me power to talk about other issues, especially something that I love, like foreign policy, like this whole Russia thing, Russia. And what I tell people is that all this done is that when we focus on what I saw with CNN, what I don't like about MSNBC and CNN is that they talk about the Trump. They're not talking about his policies. They're talking about what he did today. I'm like, that 2 million people lost their health insurance.
Yeah.
He repealed the Clean Water Act. Let's focus on that, not how he blinked today, how he looked today, or they're like, oh, he's shaking hands with Russia. He pulled out an INF, this nuclear deal, right? Russia has increased their nuclear spending, and they had an accident. In the United States, we're using this Russia propaganda, and our Department of Defense budget is at $768 billion. We don't have enough for infrastructure. We just blaming them for everything. And I'm like, guys, we're both nuclear powers. We need good relations. Mm-hmm. And I hate when people are so caught up in that propaganda. But I'm like, we're so focused on them that we forget that, like, hey, we have sanctions on Iran that's like starving people. Mm-hmm. We have troops still in Afghanistan, Iraq, and 10,000 civilians died last year. Like, the world's a big place, and you have to take some type of accountability and responsibility, but we're not taught to think outside the box. And that's one thing. That's why I'm like, diplomacy. My 3Ds, diplomacy. Like, because when I see somebody like, oh, they get all scared, I'm like, those 193 million people in Russia don't want to be blown to bits like we don't want to be blown to bits.
Mutually assured destruction.
Yeah, and exactly. And that's why I hate TV shows like Madam Secretary, where like, I turned it off after the first season, because it's like you're saying all this about making these people look like Russia look like these angry, mean people, and I'm like, they're people too. And before we talk about them and their problems, we prevented 2 million minorities from voting in 2016.
Yeah,
and we threw away 5. And Greg Palast reported that we threw 4 million ballots in the garbage. A lot of people are like, oh, we don't like Hillary. I'm like, well, 4 million people were prevented from voting. I'm like, we before we talk about their problems, and we gotta look at ourselves.
That's American exceptionalism.
Yeah, exactly. And that's one thing. I'm reading Dr. King's book now. It's like, when we talk about delivering freedom all over the world, it's like, what about here? Like, hey, okay.
How, I mean, in Vietnam, right? Like the Viet Congs, one of their frequent pieces of propaganda was like talking to black GIs, like through radios and speakers and whatever else they could, being like, why are you over here fighting us when you're just gonna go home and get spit on and disrespected by like white Americans when you get back? Like, what are you fighting for here, man?
Yeah, and that's what I tell people. And this whole election recount is a distraction.
Oh, dude.
Because I'm telling people why. He knows he lost. And I was going to tweet this. He knows he's lost. He's putting new sanctions on Iran every week. And most recently, the nuclear scientist was just assassinated. He's trying to provoke him. And what I tell people, you can say what you want about Iran, that's one of the last stable places in the Middle East. 3 million refugees from Afghanistan ran to Iran. Mm-hmm. I think 400,000 refugees from Iraq ran to Iran. Like, and we know there are big terrorist groups right there. I'm like, guys, like, pay attention here. Like,
people just there are too many people that just assume that everything in the Middle East is the same.
Yeah, yes, and it's not.
That's it. Nobody's out here like, oh, you mean Iran is actually like the Persian Empire, and like they're not in a freaking desert, like they're in the middle of the mountains, and they're not just some like rudimentary like fighting force. Like they are an advanced like technological civilization that like has a proper like medium-sized military and understands.
Yes, and that's what I'm like, and that's why I love foreign policy, because it's and you learn something new with it every single day, and that's why I'm so obsessed with. Like, one thing about foreign policy, it was always there. When I didn't feel like going out, I was studying it. I remember I before I met Asia, I got my heart broken one time, and then the whole 4 months I was just staying inside learning about how Pakistan got nukes. Like, foreign policy is just, it's so mind blowing to me, because you learn so much from it, and you get to see like, hey, they're people too. They have ideas. They have beliefs. Yeah. And one thing I remember calling Father Brown about this, like in Lebanon, there's a lot of Christians and Muslims there, and I was watching this documentary on this woman who was a Christian and she converted to Islam for her husband. And we make it seem so complicated in America, and it's not that hard. People just do it because you love somebody. We make it seem like it's a lot of papers and sheets and documents. I'm like, no, she converted because, and what she said was, before her husband died, was he never yelled at me and he treated me so well. Yeah. Yes, I knew Muslims were people too, but I had to hear and see like, oh, wait a second. He treated his wife like I would treat my wife as a Christian.
Yeah.
And I'm like, huh. I mean, I knew it, but to hear like, he never yelled at me. He treated me right.
Well, there's a purpose. There's a purpose of building these walls and like making somebody the other.
Yes.
Like forcing otherism in order to maintain established power.
Yes. yes. And that's why I'm like, I love it. That's why I study. And hopefully when this COVID is over, I can go outside and try to apply to that internship fellowship out there. And that's why I'm like, after the Hands Up Act, after that, whatever influence I have, I want to talk about diplomacy. Like, the people who I study and guide me are Nelson Mandela, President Mandela, Kofi Annan, the UN Secretary General, President Clinton, and President Hoover. Those are like my 4 heroes that I try to warp myself to study off of, to act like off of. And they're guiding me through what I'm doing now with the Hands Up Act, to have that confidence, to have that belief, to have that savviness of like, oh, I see, like, okay, like, that patience. But most recently, what has inspired me the most, the Hands Up Act, I most recently, Breonna Taylor's mother has signed a petition, and Jacob Blake's uncle has signed a petition. Antoine Rose's mother signed a petition. Michael Brown's mother signed a petition. Tamir Rice's mother signed a petition. And Daniel Saver's cousin signed a petition. And I'm like, you gotta believe. I mean, that's the most important thing, is the belief that something is bigger than me, because anybody can be shot in the arm. And whenever I run into that brick wall, I look up and I'm like, 250 years worth of slavery, they made it. 100 years of segregation, they made it. They once said, the colonizers once said, Tunisia belongs to the French, South Africa belongs to the British, and Libya belongs to the Italians, but they gained independence. So if they can defeat those odds, if Rosa Parks can sit in the bus and say, you know what? I'm not moving because of Emmett Till. I can move on. I can continue to press on for my Hands Up Act. And I'm like, this is bigger than me. And the people who lost their loved ones believe, then it's time to push forward. And a crazy story that I had to tell you is that the protest in Carbondale where I spoke, when I was marching in that, I actually lost my speech. I lost my speech. And I remember walking, I was tapping my pockets, and I was like, Asia, telling my fiance, I was like, I lost it. She's like, okay then. and I remember zoning out, listening to that music and drawing that energy from all those people who were depending on me. And after the speech, people were telling me it gave them chills. And I'm like, okay, I can do this. And then when I went to Chicago, I didn't even write anything down. And I saw that crowd of 5,000 people. I'm like, no, you're going to hear what I have to say, because it is important. You cannot murder somebody and think it's okay, whether they have a uniform or not a uniform on. And all my experience and inspiring somebody else that thought they were inferior. Because I know somebody who were scared to speak about race is watching me. And letting them know that you are not 3/5 of a person. You're a human being just like anybody else. You're not less than by any means. And yeah, that just the whole connection of the world is bigger than you, and drawing on inspiration from people who stood up against oppression to inspire me to stand up oppression here. What started out with like 100 signatures to 2.7 million, and having people watching, it's a remarkable moment, but I continue to believe that it's bigger than me.
Do you give the same speech, or do you give different speeches?
Oh, different speeches every time.
Okay.
But the only thing that stays consistent is the people who were shot in arm, like Tamir Rice, Philando Castile, Alton Sterling, Terrence Crutcher, Jacob Blake, Breonna Taylor. And I hate that I jumble sometimes because there's so many names. Yeah. That's the only thing I mess up on. And I consistently talk about how my father's cousin had his testicles tased by the police. Like, hey, police brutality is very consistent. Or they had drugs planted on them from 1994 to 2015 in Dalton, Alabama, and they're still in jail. Like those parts are consistent, but the speech changes because different crowds for different reasons. And it's going to change the game because Biden won.
Yeah.
Like, it was like, hey, if you want change, it has to vote. Now that we voted for you, now we're going to press you. Like, hey, we put you in here.
Yep.
And even if Biden didn't win, I had a plan to get the United Nations involved, because it's like no one wants to be labeled as the most racist nation. That hurts tourism. And I was like,
man, that's okay. I'm sorry to like laugh at that. Like I wasn't expecting for the line to come in and be like that hurts tourism. I'm sorry.
Yeah, because that was the plan.
Let me get serious again. Let me bring this back down.
Because that's the plan. Nobody wants to visit a racist place.
Yeah,
and that was the plan. Now I'm like, no. I'm going to, like, that's what I've told myself. I'm going to tell United Nations, do not come here because they are murdering people without punishment. Without any regard. I'm sick and tired of the talking. And the thing is, I know people are watching. I know, seriously, congressmen and senators are watching. But like the longer you wait, the more signatures I get, and it's like, where were you at?
Yeah.
Or like what Future said, like, where were you at? Because when I was at 400,000 for that whole month period, that was enough. That's half the state of Delaware, half the population of Delaware. Now in 2.7, that's the population of Chicago. It's there and it's growing. I'm so happy and thankful from Iomi from Impact Demand, where she invited me out in front of Wisconsin, and I got to speak in front of the Capitol. I got to see all these people that believe, and I've learned a lot. I've learned a lot of things, like just stepping back and seeing how people view the police, how they feel about things, how they're trying to change the world, because there's more than one problem. I can tell you that.
What have you gotten a feel for in better understanding how media amplifies the message? Right? Like we were talking before the podcast, I was like, the Travis that is now is like the constant evolution of the Travis that was 3 years ago when I first met you and whatever else. And it's like I've seen from step one how you have gotten more ingratiated in media and an understanding of how to work with amplifying your message through that.
I love what Malcolm X says. Media is the most powerful entity in the world because it can make an innocent man seem guilty and a guilty man seem innocent. And that's how media works. And that's what I tell you with the whole Russian thing. I'm like, while we're blaming them, our Department of Defense spending went up to $768 billion. NATO is at record spending. Like, hey guys, like I'm kind of hungry here. We got a homeless problem here, because I know, and it can shape and make somebody seem like a bad human being, and that's why I get sick of Islamophobia, because there's 420 million people that speak Arabic, and there's a billion Muslims out there who are innocent and don't want to die, just like I don't want to die. Who are doctors and lawyers just like you and me. And I've learned that media can change and manipulate people to thinking something is possible when it's impossible. Or, like, for example, they said Jacob Blake had a weapon on him. And I'm like, what? And I saw how media shaped that, but it turned out to be false. And that's one thing I hate to get off topic, but I'm really scared about how easily we can Photoshop things. Because I'm like, for you to Photoshop, like, a weapon in somebody's hand, no. That's not okay. And it was reported that, like, no, that's a fake image. Yeah, media is what's the word? Wow, I used to talk about it, how it used to be a law where they used to regulate it a little bit.
So I talked to Jack Titchener about this a handful of episodes ago.
Fairness doctrine. Yeah, go ahead.
That's it. You got it. No, go, man. It's your interview.
Yeah, the fairness doctrine. I'm like, they need to really bring that back. I know it disappeared after 82. But we really need it, especially the way social media is. Like, there's so much information. I'm a journalist. I've been published. I've written stuff about the Afghanistan peace deal and COVID-19. But I'm educated, and I specialize in North Africa, Middle East issues. And I know I'm qualified versus somebody who can just post something on the blog and not watch Al Jazeera or TRT World. I'm like, where are you getting this information from? Like, hey, like, there's people out there, right? Like that breathe.
Are there and observing, and documenting,
exactly.
And then sharing that back in the form of news.
Exactly. And in the way and CNN, because it's the largest news source. Like when I was doing my diplomacy class, they're like, "Are y'all really going to vote for Kanye?" I was like, "No, we're not. We're going to have a few people, and if we are, I told them consistent voters are not going to vote for Kanye.
Yeah,
people who know Medicaid is on the line." Who know that climate change is on the line, who know criminal justice reform is on the line, are not going to vote for Kanye. Even better yet, even the Trump supporters who believe that he's going to bring in these jobs, who really truly believe or benefited from his tax cut. I'm not gonna vote for some random celebrity, but the way that it looks to them, it's like, oh, and that's I'm like, wow.
Why do you even give that time?
Yeah.
Like if you know something is strictly for the purposes of, arguably entertainment value,
Yes.
right? Which is a good description of a lot of, Donald Trump's activities,
Yeah.
right? That it is the reality TV show side of things and making it a spectacle versus, like you said earlier, the actual policy implications of
Yes.
the actions taken with a pen.
Yeah. I heard somebody say like, oh, I really hate President Trump today. I'm like, what do you do today? That's just how I look at it.
Yeah.
And this is how I see the brand. I'm like, I want to focus on the policies. Focus on how the tax cut affected people. Focus on how what the unemployment numbers are. Focus on that. Focus on that. Because I don't care what type of suit he wore. I don't care if he eating McDonald's on the plane. I care about the homeless person or the person on WIC trying to feed their child. Or the $6 billion cut from HUD. I remember going for my U.S. Senate internship, going down to Cairo and seeing all those people lose their house. I remember going to the Newman Center and praying for hours that day because that could have been me. And I remember I was so angry because my little brother missed some homework assignments. I remember screaming at him. I didn't mean to, but I was like, you don't understand the opportunity mom and dad just gave us.
Yeah.
Seeing all those people lose their houses. He didn't talk to me for a few days. And I don't somewhat regret it, but I don't because I saw 4,000 people lose their homes.
Yeah.
Because Ben Carson cut from HUD. And the Trump administration cut $6 billion from public aid. Like, those are policies. I don't care that he wears the red tie over and over again. He's president.
Yeah.
Like, focus on the policy. And one thing that I have that kind of sucks I see before that other people don't have is I see things happen before everybody else does. And, like, this whole unemployment rate number automatically dropped down. All you did was cut unemployment benefits, and you don't count those people anymore, and your numbers shrink. That's what
and that's what people miss. They're like, oh well, it's unemployment's just gone down. No. You no longer become a statistic when you are not part of the data set.
And I've been trying to write it. Look, this will be my own cited source. I do have to work on my writing. I remember writing this. I had Father Brown check it. That's how Reagan was able to lower his unemployment rate. What he did was in 1982 or 1981, he passed a bill to cut unemployment benefits by like $30 billion. And I remember the unemployment rate dropped from 12% all the way down to 8%. What he did was he just cut the benefits. The economy didn't change. And when you cut the benefits, you no longer count it.
Yeah.
And the only the people whose unemployment numbers were accurate are President Clinton and President Bush, because Bush extended unemployment benefits. Yeah, they're like, oh yeah, his economy sucked. Don't I had disagree with a lot of his policies, especially somebody who loves foreign policy.
Yeah.
But he extended unemployment benefits twice. So, and that's why I'm looking at Trump, President Trump. He's not extending unemployment benefits.
Yeah.
I'm like, those people in COVID don't have jobs. They don't. And all our homelessness is about to increase triple.
Oh, dude, it's terrifying.
And I love my Hands Up Act. I do. But COVID has to come first.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I'm Tamir Rice, Alton Sterling, Philando Castile, they are in my heart. But we can't protest if we can't go outside.
Yeah.
And we're at 1.5 million deaths globally. The United Nations, President Trump cut, $1 billion from the United Nations. Like, I'm like, this is genocide. You're cutting funding from people trying to stop this.
And people miss the understanding of like what sponsoring or not sponsoring activity means.
Yes.
Right? Like, it feels real direct when we spend billions of dollars on missiles that we know are intended to blow shit up and kill people.
Yes.
But we don't think about it in terms of, oh, okay, well, because we cut, millions of dollars, not quite billions, but millions of dollars out of, reproductive health care access that we would suffice for in foreign nations, that led to, terminal health care issues related to pregnancy. Whether that is miscarriages or the deaths of mothers in labor, or just a failure of any other type of birth related health care. I mean, it's wild to me.
Yeah, and what I tell people, speaking of which, look, I love this show. We can go anywhere.
Yeah, that's it.
There's a reason why my goal one day is to live in a different country, study there. But I want my kids born in Africa because I saw this one report on, I think, unusual deaths or unusual causes where it says the infant death in America is higher than Africa in South America. Mm-hmm. You know, the countries that we look at, all these brown and black people are inferior to us, but they have more success of infant birth and children, babies being born, not dying than we do. I'm like, that's where our money needs to go.
Yeah.
Not like you said. And that's why I love the triple D, diplomacy, because that saves money.
Yeah.
That's important. That's a human being. And that's why I love Al Jazeera and TRT World and Democracy Now! Because it brings humanity to those people. And and going back to what you were talking about with media, like I just found out, I love this. I found this out the other day. Last night what I told my fiance is that, you know how we have sanctions on Venezuela, and I told her relations with Venezuela has been bad since 2002 because Hugo Chavez threatened to cut oil supplies to President Bush if he invades Iraq. Mm-hmm. And that's why, and we tried to commit a coup, and we failed. But that's why our relations have been tainted ever since. Mm-hmm. And that's why I'm like, that's an important part of history, and just of saying, oh, Venezuela, they're evil.
Yeah.
Like, hey, guys, there's a reason why our relations are bad. And that goes back to media, like, hey, guys, we have to hear the brown and black people's perspective, the Muslims' perspective. Like, it's all connected. It really is.
No, the touching back on the Russia side of things, right? You were talking about, all the different components there. It's like we've never actually stopped having a Cold War with Russia, right? Like at the end of the day, like Vladimir Putin is a remnant of the Soviet Union.
Yeah.
And, the entrenched state power structure that and I can't remember who I was talking to a couple podcasts ago about this, but like in my post-Soviet Russia class that I took like junior, senior year, whatever it was like the phrase was, you go into in America, you go into business to get into politics. In Russia, you go into politics to get into business. Right?
They have problems, like we do. But one thing I tell people, I love foreign policy so much, is that Secretary of State James Baker under President H.W. Bush, Daddy Bush is what people like Dr. Donahue like to say, Daddy Bush, said, after the Soviet Union, I believe it was the Soviet Union that collapsed, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, after they collapsed, or was it Soviet Union, USSR?
Well, I'm a bad student of history.
Either way,
are they the same as the Soviet Union, the USSR, whatever? Like I'm looking at when people say Soviet, they think what was the collection of states under what is now Russia pre-1989.
So, Soviet Union, it fell in 1990, and it was an agreement by Secretary of State James Baker, not 1 inch eastward. Not 1 inch eastward will we expand NATO, right? And my favorite president, Bill Clinton, broke that promise. And Boris Yeltsin, who's just trying to improve relations with the West, let NATO expand all the way over to Poland in 1999. And now we have 30 countries under NATO, and it's like almost as if, Russia's completely surrounded, and we have nuclear weapons in Poland, right outside of Russia's doors. And for people at home, that's like Russia giving nuclear weapons to Mexico.
Yeah.
I would be pissed. Like, I have no problems with beef with Mexico, but I would be pissed. Like, what do you mean? Why you have nukes there? So that's why I say that explains why they're angry.
Yeah.
And that's important. We promised in 1991, even, I cannot remember his name, the German chancellor promised not to expand NATO. When they gave us, I believe after the Berlin Wall, when West Germany got part of East Germany and formed one Germany country, which, Germany has a bad history, World War I and World War II. Let's not, let them get their land back. And we expand NATO 9 years later. I'm like, that's why our relations is bad. Like I said, I would not like it at all if there was nukes outside.
Well, and it's such a short timeline. People think we live in like this bubble where it's just the here and now that exists, but it's like,
no,
it's only been 30 years.
Yeah. Yes.
Since
yes
the collapse of the Soviet Union. Like
yes.
that's literally just as old as, I mean, I'm 31. How old? You're
26.
26, right? So like it's just a little bit outside of our memorable lifetimes.
Yes.
But like it's fresh in the minds of our parents.
Yeah. But some parents don't know that we weren't supposed to expand NATO.
Yeah.
And that's why I'm obsessed with history, and that's why I love Malcolm X said. He's like, that's what's wrong with you. You don't know your history. And that's why I'm like, that's what's wrong with everybody about being angry about Russia. I'm like, wait, hold up, guys. We weren't supposed to have nuclear weapons outside of their borders, like, Mexico or even Haiti having nuclear weapons.
Yeah.
Like, whoa,
that's close.
Yeah, that we wouldn't be happy about that. And that's why I tell people, like, hey, the world's bigger than just you.
Yeah.
It really is. And raising a level of consciousness is that's why I'm so thankful I took Africana Studies, because this is how colonized my mind was. I didn't want to take it. Ms. Matthews, my academic advisor, forced me to take it. And I was interested right after the first day of class. Father Brown came in and said, the rioting that they're doing in Ferguson is justifiable. And I'm like, wait, what? Why would you say such a thing? It's something so controversial. And I remember this was before I was as educated as I was, going to my ROTC class saying that. I wasn't educated enough, and they're like, they're destroying their own neighborhood. And I was like, it's justifiable. That's all I had. But now that I have the knowledge I do now, I'm like, well, when during the American Revolution, when I believe his name is Atticus, it was a black dude who was a runaway slave, ran towards the British. He was part of the people that were shot unarmed in the American Revolution. They rioted too. And I'm like, that's an important part. And we're in, this is why I wanted to be in the military. Like, hey, like, this is what created the U.S. Army. Like, unarmed shootings is what created us and the reason why we're employed. And, like, raising that level of consciousness is just so important, because, like, a lot of people just roll their eyes. Like, that's why there's a reason why I always call my friend Daryl every single day. Daryl Hill, because it's like he's the only one that sometimes keeps up with me, that understands. Or, like, or that's what I call almost Father Brown all the time. Or even my granny. My granny understands. Every single year, I'm kind of sad I won't be able to see her this year because of COVID. Every single year we talk about which generation has it harder, right? I just talk stuff to her. And I get Sidney Poitier movies. I'm a movie fan. I love all types of movies. I always get black and white movies. It doesn't matter. Watchwear every single year for New Year's for the past 5 years. And I always tell her, like, well, I'm going to go, what type of racism I have to fight, or what my hands up act. And she always tells me when she was remembers the day when LBJ said on TV, "We shall overcome." And I'm like, that's all she ever says when I talk stuff. I'm like, or the road ahead of me, like, "We shall overcome." And I'm like, well, she grew up in Mississippi. That's good enough for me, like, in the 60s. So she knows what she's saying.
Do you think part of that is a want to put a best foot forward to future generations, like coming from your grandma being like, I'm not going to sit here and dwell on the highly problematic, like, institutionalized structures of racism that led to violence and death, and economic forced economic shortcomings and all that other stuff. Like, is she just trying to push, like, forget all that, like, here's what the progress was. Here's the one shining light amidst all this other BS around it.
Yes, yeah. And she always is like, she's like, every single generation should make it easier for the next one. And she's like, you guys got it easy, but she's like, that was the goal. Like that. And my granny always called to her and asked her, you would think, and she watches the news every day. This is where my love of news. My parents didn't let my brother and I watch TV Monday through Friday. All they would have on is sports. And because my dad's a huge basketball guy and football, that's why my brother has his obsession with sports. And the news was always on for me. And I just, like WGN, or when I was with my granny, you know how you wake up early for Saturday night cartoons? My granny would have WGN on. And that's where my love of, like, news come from. Like, just that whole, and, like, now that I have this obsession with news, with the consciousness, with how the news portrays itself. I'm like, oh, I'm a bad man now.
So is that something that you were really able to latch on to interning with the Paul Simon Public Policy Institute?
Yes.
Like, because of Paul Simon's background, in media, and using that to transition into direct impact through policymaking.
Yes. With Paul Simon Institute gave me one heck of an opportunity. I remember I applied. I didn't get it the first time. I was a junior. I was upset about it because, I came into that interview prepared. Any question they had. I was ready for it, but I was a junior, and they gave it to a senior. Then I came back the second time, and I've learned a lot watching those state reps. I really did. It's a busy place. Mm-hmm. Like, I was like, oh, if I was a state rep, I'll talk to everybody. No, that's tiresome. It really is. There's not them being mean or a jerk. It's just, once again, you got 100 issues. Mm-hmm. And somebody like me, the 100 issues to me is always going to be foreign policy, but 100 issues in the state. And because Illinois is a Democratic state, people are like, and I went in there when Trump first won, President Trump first won. And I was like, I'd never seen the Capitol so filled. And they're like, oh, yeah, it's always packed. But I guarantee it was double that. Because this is a blue state. You just got a red president. And we had to worry about Medicaid. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, that was that.
That's cool, man. That's cool. It is a gem of a place to have, and the access that it provides beyond its own four walls is, you're an example of just how how influential that activity can be.
Yeah, it's just is one opportunity that I needed, and that in the mixture of books just opened up so many doors. Books and that, and just watching, I've always been a visual learner, just watching the news. When people ask, how you get so far, I'm like, all I do is just click. All you have to do is lay there and watch TRT World, and you learn. Al Jazeera, this whole thing. I sent my brother a screenshot of. I was like, I bet you never even heard of Azerbaijan or Armenia. He's like, what is that? But all I did was watch it, and it's I don't want to say I'm an expert on it, but I was like, I know what everything is going on, and I know how it's going to end.
It was wild. My best friend, he spent 3 years in the Peace Corps in Azerbaijan.
Yeah.
In the mountainous regions, northeast, I think. Uh-huh. I don't remember exactly, but it was near the border with Armenia, and
Is it where the Nagorno-Karabakh is?
So
Yes.
not where the actual conflict region was, but just west of the conflict region itself by maybe 40 miles, something like that. And he lost this has been a little less than a decade, right? So he would have been teaching kids that are 10, 12 years old, whatever, that he's got what would be family from there that died in the conflict. And holy crap, the fact that conflict came to such a screeching halt.
Woo!
Now
yes,
let's talk.
We can talk about that. Yes,
the despair. That is why. Yeah. That's why we spend so much damn money on military infrastructure. Is because when you show a disparity like that, that seems to chill most conflicts. Now, would it be like that with China or with Russia? Not exactly, but with smaller nations, because of Armenia's capabilities, having drones, having advanced weaponry and things like that, while Armenia was just fighting with your traditional foot soldiers and standard munitions and standard artillery and things like that. That is horses versus tanks.
Yeah. And this is what I got so much to say about that. And this is why I told Azerbaijan and Armenia what the United Nations said. They wanted to stop that war right away because they said they would end up like Syria in months.
Oh yeah.
Because Syria, we can talk about that one later. Yeah. But Syria has 8 million refugees for the people at home. But they're a decent rich country. But Azerbaijan, they said, has an ocean full of oil.
Oh, yeah.
I knew they had, and they said they've been planning and buying weapons for the last 25 years.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
I'm 26. I'm like, let me tell you something. That's a lot of weapons.
Yeah.
And I knew it was going to end. That's why I'm happy it stopped. And that's why I don't like it when people say, oh, Russia's evil, that's in the other. Russia stopped that war. Turkey also stopped that war. And Russia put peacekeeping troops out there to make sure that Azerbaijan won't come back. But when I was watching the interview, I know the United Nations says Armenia was occupying that land, but there was 100,000 people that lived there in that land for 25 years. And they all just lost their homes. And I bet you a lot of them don't even know that they were occupying land. Mm-hmm. And I'm happy the Armenian president signed the peace deal because, like he said, like I heard somebody from RT America, sometimes fighting to the last drop of blood isn't the best thing. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, they're going to come back and attack again. And I'm like, how do you stop something like that? Because they're going to come back. Armenians are going to come back. I hope they don't. But I'm like, the people in Armenia are mad because they're like, oh, he signed the peace deal. But I'm like, guys, it's a peace deal. Azerbaijan, they won the war. But I'm like, you just took all those 100,000 people's homes. Like, I know they were occupying there, but that's been 25 years. There had to be a better way instead of just fighting. And I'm glad it ended. And I just like, it's not going to end well because it's like all those people, you got 15-year-olds, 18-year-olds, 12-year-olds who are now seeing somebody just take their land. Mm-hmm. Like they said with the Iraq war, how we should just accept the President Hussein stepping down. Like 2003 to 2020, there's 17-year-olds and all they know is war.
And that is scary. I mean, it's so much more than that. I mean, Afghanistan is a great example of that because it's, it's Alexander the Great and before, right, has been a place where the land has seen warfare and the people have had to deal with the repercussions of their nation simply being subject to what is constant war. It's like at some point in time that just becomes what people know. Mm-hmm. And it's wild to look at things like Afghan University from the 1970s where it looked very westernized. Yeah. Right? And see that, okay, that was just 50 years ago. Yeah. Right? 45 years ago. Uh-huh. And now a major change in a different way to a much more conservative form of governance. But it's like, what is real in all that? Like, if there was this 70 years ago, but then there is this 30 years ago, but if you look back 500 years, there's this. It's like, what? Give me something that
I can hold on to.
But there's not, because that's what happens when places are forced into a constant state of change and fluctuation, because there are other powers that be that want to try and take resources out of there or utilize the land for, pass through for commerce or something like that. And they just see their own economic interest as greater than any one civilization's right to be itself.
Or you can, just employ them to give you the resource. Like, I was like, guys, you can just pay them, like, because American money is worth more than ours. Like, if you give them $1,000, like, that can employ like 2,000 people to give you the resource that you want, and everybody wins. Like, oh my goodness. But yeah, the whole I will say this: I'm gonna give President Trump credit if this peace deal, because I wrote my policy, the peace deal wasn't gonna go through. Mm-hmm. But if he pulls all these troops out, and this is what it goes back to this media thing, I think it's a good thing. We need to leave. Mm-hmm. Give him that. And then when I hear my friend, I don't want to put his name on blast, he's hearing on MSNBC like, oh, Trump is betraying our allies by pulling us out of Afghanistan. I'm like, guys, I think I
got a news notification earlier today that for the first time in 19 years, the regional Taliban forces in the established Afghan government have put on paper a peace deal. I don't know if they've signed it yet. Yeah. But that like they are at least real close to it. Uh-huh. Now, we've been close before. The question is, does it come through this time? Does it hold this time? Mm. Whatever. And is removal of troops from the area an influence on that? Yes.
And I hope so. I would like to think so. And this, I remember, this is why I'm just going to go from it, because how we got here is always a question. I remember in first grade watching 9/11 happen on the TV screen, and it's stuck into my head to this day. I can tell you where I was, My mom was ringing off the hook. So 19 years later, I'm recruiting students to come to SIU, and all they know is that we've been in Afghanistan. And we fought in this war, and one of the accomplishments was we changed the Afghan constitution to put women's rights in there in 2004 so women can go to college and this, that, and the other and get jobs. The Taliban, they take back over, want to take all that progress away. And I'm like, so there's a lot of American troops that actually died to change this constitution. This is a complex situation. Mm-hmm. So if we take our troops out and they take over, all those people that died to change this constitution goes away. But I like that they're signing a peace deal. I didn't like that they freed 5,000 Taliban prisoners in exchange for like a peace deal. But
was that part of the most recent? I didn't realize.
Yeah, that was part of the peace deal. I was like, you want the Afghan government to release 5,000 prisoners?
That's a lot.
Yeah, I was like, okay, but they did it, and I was like, okay, please, because I don't want them to get them and then they attack and all that. Because Kabul, I want that place to be very stable because it's like they got a university there, they got a city. You need something economically to give people hope. Like, just don't touch that city. I hate to say don't forget about the rural people. We need something strong to send infrastructure out because Afghanistan got this thing called a Blue Mosque. Mm-hmm. It's a beautiful place. I've seen it, and I'm like, that's tourism money right there.
Yeah,
and. So Trump administration, I know in back in 2014, President Obama said we were going to leave. He cut the troop withdrawal from 100,000 to 16,000. Mm-hmm. And then Trump got it from 16,000 to 8,000. I want them all going before he leaves. Mm-hmm. I will give him props. I'll give him credit. I'll give him a hoo-hoo because 19 years is long enough.
Yeah.
It's long enough.
And you don't have the mindset that that's just going to be a destabilizing action. And I mean, and arguably, again, we're talking about right now. Well, what are the motions that are being gone through right now in peace talks? So, okay, if there's peace talks that are work, I mean, and let's throw the third the third actor into that in the mix of the Taliban, the Afghan government. Third would be remnants of ISIS. Right. Okay. Well, are there mix? Is there a mix of the Afghan government and the Taliban that say, listen, okay, we want to agree to create a cohesive government and we will suppress any extremism that comes out of the remnants of ISIS. Mm-hmm. Right. And it's not like there's not blueprints for this shit before in most modern political cultures. Right. Like Ireland and Sinn Féin, and
speaking of the Crown, but go ahead.
Like the actually going from an opposition force or rebel force or however you want to refer to them, right? Or the occupied force, the folks that were being colonized. I don't know enough about it to be able to speak. Like I've only written one paper on it, and it wasn't very good. So but it is to say that like there's something there that says, listen, there can be people that go from a violent fighting force to a political party that is just as much a part of governance as anything else, and we've got blueprints for that all over this world.
The ANC.
Yeah,
ANC was considered a terrorist organization to Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher and President Reagan. But now the ANC is Nelson Mandela's main party in South Africa. And I'm like, I don't know. I was like, because Nelson, that's my hero. Like that's my boy. But I was like, you would consider a terrorist organization? And that's like in 2013 when I was a freshman, I was like, oh, Nelson Mandela died. That's sad. And I remember getting chills when I studied up on him. And I'm like, whoa, you guys are considered terrorists? I was like, whoa.
Yeah.
And now you're running the country and you're calling out other countries when they're committing notorious crimes. And I'm like, the world changes, man.
Well, and the question is, right, and this goes back to that core tenet of this conversation, which has been external influence. And the question on the other side of external influence is what happens when your external influence turns to internal influence.
Yeah.
Right? And do you have the character to carry through with the policy efforts that actually work to achieve your goals as opposed to continuing to antagonize simply for the sake of that's how you've continued to operate, right? And something like Truth and Reconciliation.
Yep.
Right? Where Everybody puts it on the table. This is what we did.
Yeah.
This is what we do to fix it, because we all exist in this space and there's nothing that's going to change the past, but we are going to change the future if we act accordingly.
And that's what there's so many other African leaders, but that's what President Mandela said. And that's why I love that image. I love AP News Archives. I love looking at all those old photos of even Isaac Rabin shaking hands with Yasser Arafat. I just love AP Archives, like seeing those old photos. I've seen President Mandela shake the hand of Queen Elizabeth II when the British came to South Africa. Was a remarkable image to me. It was, and President Mandela, after all the things he went through, still called her Your Majesty. And I'm like, hey, like whoa, like, and I love what Nelson Mandela said. I'm paraphrasing. He's like, well, you say wanting revenge is like drinking poison. You're only hardening yourself. He's like, forgiveness is the cure. And I'm like, wow, that. And when you think about it, you know how you just see, oh, Nelson Mandela served 27 years to liberate South Africa. I was watching this one documentary where it showed his face, and I actually saw the pain in his face.
Yeah.
And I was like, wow, you sacrificed a lot. You were in relations with your daughter and wife and kids. But at the same time, you inspired millions. You're inspiring me, who's about to change America. The sacrifice he did, it might have been, it was huge, but the influence globally is inspiring me to like, hey, if he can do 27 years, I can, get a few more people to sign my petition. and accepting that there are people who always try. And what people forget, like, seeing, this is why I love Democracy Now! Archives, seeing that there are always people still fighting. Like, Congresswoman Maxine Waters was calling out the Bush administration for a coup in Haiti. She was still fighting. And she was fighting the Reagan administration with the war on drugs. But we just look at her as just Auntie Maxie. I'm like, no, this woman has a history of fighting. Seeing Secretary of State John Kerry, I saw him when he was a senator being anti-Vietnam, anti-war, him fighting. And I'm like, you have to, or Senator Kennedy, JFK's, I believe, brother, saying that George Bush Iraq War is the new Vietnam. Like, seeing these people fighting and grasping that you are not alone in your struggle. Yeah, it might be different ideas or different realms of getting there, but this universal struggle where you're brown, black, or white, just fighting, because that affects you. You have kids, right?
Yeah.
That you don't want your, because segregation hurts everybody. Because let's just say the best doctor, preventing that. What I read in the book is that they closed down a whole facility just to make sure black people couldn't integrate in that facility. But when they closed it down, they were losing taxpayer dollars. Mm-hmm. They were losing tourism dollars. And that was less funding for the white schools. And you already know there's no funding for the black schools, but there's even less funding. And I'm like, so that's how segregation hurts everybody. And like, there's a job opportunity there that somebody brown, black, or white may be able to fill, but if you don't give it to them, that job's not being filled, and that's less tax revenue. And it's like, it's all connected. Oppression hurts everybody. It really does. And like I said, police brutality hurts everybody. One thing I always say is that what happens to black people will eventually happen to white people. I was reading Ida B. Wells' Southern Horror Story, where she said white man raped this 10-year-old black girl. And he served 6 months in prison, and then he was hired back by the Memphis, Nashville police force. After serving 6 months in jail for rape, you hire him to the police force. Fast forward from 18, let's just say, I think that book was written like 1902. Fast forward from 1902 to 2019, you find out 2 white male police officers throw a white woman in the back of a car and sexually assault her. And then 9 police officers wait outside her hospital bed. They're all white. What happens to us eventually happens to you. And that's why people have to understand. Even that Iraq war that we're all the way over in, spending $5 trillion, that's preventing us from getting our sidewalks filled over here. And then when you damage your car riding over a pothole, you got to spend money to fix it. Like, everything is connected. Like Bob Marley says, what goes around comes around.
And we have come around to the end of the podcast.
Yeah.
Stellar. I hope you took as much away from this as I was able to. Keep an eye on Mr. Travis Washington. He's not just gone places, he's going places. And he's probably going to take you with him along the way because it's not just a one-person sort of deal. I think you made that clear in this conversation. Episode 28 of the WTF Carbondale podcast, Travis Washington. Have a good one, whatever
Thank
that
you.
one.
Thank you so much for having me.
Happy to have you, man.
Yeah.
It was a great conversation.
Wait, what's your favorite? Oh, were you done recording?
I mean,